guys, for today and Friday, I know everybody is running off fumes. How many of you still have major midterm events this week, whether it be test or papers? Okay, well, here's the good news. All the hard work in this class between now and break is done. All you have to do is be here, be present, and absorb and participate in the conversation. That should count for something, right? I always like to front load the class so that we're not going into the last week before break with lots of things to do. That being said, your only responsibility in this class this week, other than being here and being present, is to make sure you've watched the movie and that you do a discussion post by the 28th. And again, if everybody has those in, I'll grade them, and everybody will have an easy 10 points to augment their midterm grade. I'm not going to punish you if you don't get them in, but basically, if not everybody has them in, I won't grade them. So let's get them all in so everybody has something to say about the movie. It gives everybody an easy 10 points on the midterm. We all good with that? Okay, guys, we're going to be continuing Chapter 4 today because we're talking about actually the underpinnings of websites themselves. We are going to have an assignment that's due when we get back on the 11th. I might even set the due date back a little more so we have some time to talk through the assignment in class. I'm going to be asking you to tell me how you would build a website based on the considerations that I've put forth for a site that rents superheroes in costume for children's birthday parties. Or maybe adult parties if they're into that kind of thing. But it comes down to whatever you would use to create the website based on these statistics, based on these criteria. We're going to cover that when we get back, so I probably will move that date back a little more than where we are already at. Guys, a little bit of current events to start off our day. Guys, I'm going to play a news clip for you from the last 24 hours and get your opinion about it because it involves technology and distraction. So, speaking of distraction, please put your eyes. He was playing on an iPhone. You asked the question. That's how they got involved. Yes. I know I have an opinion on that matter. I'm curious what yours are.
So, I don't know. This is a little bit kind of an extreme comparison, but nobody blames alcohol companies for making people alcohol. Not making, but for people becoming alcoholics and then getting sick or dying because of that. Or at least nowadays with all the warnings, people who smoke and then get lung cancer. So it's the same thing kind of with Tesla. You're choosing to, they give you proper warnings, even though, I don't know. I in this day and age of suing everything, it just irritates me because you chose to do something that was unsafe, and then something that was a possibility happened, and now you're upset because of it. Right. And I know he died, which is unfortunate, but he made that choice when he chose to play video games and not pay attention.
We're going to work our way around in order here.
I was going to say, I don't think Tesla's a perfect company, but they receive way too much scrutiny for their self-driving car and stuff. It's pretty obvious, whenever you get the vehicle, it's you're not supposed to remove your hands from the wheel and make more noise.
One would think.
To play devil's advocate, if you have a feature that's called autopilot, it doesn't work, there's bound to be someone that's autopilot, I don't have to drive anymore.
Alright, that's fair. I guess it is kind
No
of
matter how many warnings you have, it's a little full.
I guess building off that a little bit, I think that with all of the advanced safety technology and that, I feel it almost encourages people to be less alert and aware. It's almost like an excuse to think, I don't really need to pay attention as much because it's gonna warn me when something's gonna happen or that. And so I think that is also kind of something to think about because people hear that it's autopilot, then even if they know they can't fully go to sleep or something,
Or the people have.
they kind of think that I can kind of check out mentally and just let it warn me when things are gonna happen. And so I feel like that's also kind of issue that needs to be addressed.
Let's keep going.
I don't know how much Tesla came out before this happened. But in the video they were saying they told them it's not 100% proof yet. There are still glitches, there are still issues. And the guy said he had to keep his hands off the wheel because the minute he took them off, the autopilot went off. Mm-hmm. So I think if Tesla made that known, then the blame shouldn't all be on them.
I tend to keep going.
was saying, when you make it's perfect sense. So in the esports room, somebody signed out of the laptop, some of the gaming computer, and we're all like, how's that even possible? Like, that's so hard to do. Why would like someone do that? But the bottom line is, when you create a product, you have to like code for every possible scenario. And in this case, like you can't like send out something and be like, oh yeah, by the way, like this kind of doesn't work. Like use it this certain way. No, once you like submit a product, so whatever, everyone's gonna use it some weird like way. Every possible way is like you have to think of every possible solution, like all possibilities of how someone can use your product. And then like they didn't, like you can't like I said, the autopilot, and then say like, oh yeah, only use it this certain way.
I do agree with that too. The autopilot thing is really, they should rename it like assistant drivers.
That's a good point. That's a good point about even the name. And Josh, you had a comment too.
Yeah, I think when the guys in the video, they said you have to take responsibility when they're reading behind the wheel. And I think that's true. Like, yeah, you have autopilot, but it's on, like, it's gonna be on you. Like, you have to be aware that it's your responsibility to be safe. And, like, there were warnings that the autopilot there might be, like, malfunctions, so you have to, like, account for that and still be responsible for what happens, because you are, like, behind the wheel.
I think there's a lot of interesting things, even in the stuff that was said in the video. I get the point. If we're saying, hey, this is autopilot, that's giving us the expectation in the title that yes, this is something that should be able to take care of us, even if we're deciding to play on our phones while we drive. But the flip side is Tesla also has made vocal statements that this isn't foolproof. This isn't something you should be completely trusting. The next part, the guy who was trusting his autopilot and playing video games actually works for Apple. Like, he was a programmer, systems analyst for Apple, who maybe should have known better, you know. And I get your point that if you're advertising it as such, it should be such. But the flip side of it also is, the wife had mentioned that he had said before that sometimes this autopilot doesn't work so well. So he was aware that there were glitches, but he's still choosing to play video games behind the wheel. I mean, did you ever think you'd be having this conversation in a classroom that somebody died in a car last year because they could not be sucked away from their phone to be able to drive on an interstate outside of San Diego, like one of the busiest highways in the country? Yes.
I mean, I find that very believable if it was like 16 to like 21-year-old, but that guy, he looked like a older person, which I find that more shocking.
Yeah, I do too. Yes.
Also, it's kind of strange that he's like on a highway. And I know it's probably like more responsible. Like the autopilot probably works better on highways because they're more straightaways and stuff. But like that's probably the most dangerous place to be driving regardless. Like,
Yeah.
You're gonna be paying attention anywhere. That's a good place to do it.
I would think so too. And I guess I want to ask you guys, what are your expectations of technology? Because this is an e-commerce class. We're talking about making customers happy and making people happy with the services we're providing. When we think about cars versus computers, some of our differences in expectations. We expect that every time we start the key in our car, it's going to turn on and start up, that we're not going to get a system patch downloading. Could you imagine if it was like Windows? Every time you went to start your car, oh crap, I'm going to be late for class today because I got a system patch I got to install. Although Tesla does that, they do it over the air. So we've got a different expectation for both of these things, but they're starting to merge in the form of these vehicles. Does anybody here, by show of hands, who here has complete faith in their Windows operating system? Yeah, who here has complete faith that their car should start every time you turn the key? It should. And here we are hitting this cross section. One of the owners, Phil Ford, made the statement that Ford Motor Company is no longer a car company. They're a technology company that sells cars. This is where this stuff starts crossing over, and our expectations are going into places maybe they hadn't before. Yes?
That's funny. Of all people, my grandma's like a big Tesla girl. And,
Does she have a Tesla?
yeah, she has the Model 3, and then she ordered the Cybertruck the day you could pre-order it. She ordered it. Of all people, my
Your
grandma.
grandmother's like the coolest old
I
person
know,
ever.
she's pretty cool. But like it is wild because when I first like rode in it, I was expecting the autopilot to be very kind of like sketchy and like where I wouldn't trust it. And they say you can only really use it on highway. They say like not to use it on like back roads or like in like cities or towns or whatever. But like you put so much trust into it because it's so reliable. Like it will drive through like these back roads and like through towns, like it'll make the turns and everything perfectly. Like you forget that it's not even ready to do that kind of stuff. And like they specifically tell you not to because it's so good. Like you just like start to put your trust into it, even though like, you know you're not supposed to.
So in a complete right state of mind, it would be interesting to program coordinates from Spanky's down to campus and see how the car would do. That would be pretty interesting. Wow, so she's got a Cybertruck on order?
Yeah.
Wow, I got to meet this woman. That's awesome. Any other comments before we jump into the material for today? Yes?
This is like a general thing. Like the automated car trend kind of needs to. The main problem with it is that not everyone has an automated car. If there was some way for them to communicate with each other flawlessly like that, I bet these accidents wouldn't happen.
Yes. Generally speaking, we had a saying back when I worked in technology. We used to have a saying: if the problem was not in the computer, the problem was between the monitor and the keyboard. So the monitor, keyboard, and here I am standing in the middle of it. People are always the variable that causes problems. That cause problems in these types of systems because we're not rational, we're not predictable, and we don't go always by what the system says we should do. Yes.
Do you think stuff like self-driving cars would be as big here if we had better public transportation?
That's a really excellent point. Yeah, I think, and the issue of public transportation is a big question to begin with, but I think if we had more public transportation, think about it. Let's be honest here. If I'm talking about people in your age, what is the biggest reason everybody's psyched about self-driving cars?
You get drunk.
That's exactly right. All of a sudden, we're keeping it real, right? And that was Jane Smith who made that comment, not anybody actually in this class. For the recording, sake of the recording. But that's reality of it. If we had public transit systems, that would be less of a concern for everybody. It's an excellent point. Any other last words before we continue? Yes.
I know you mentioned before, I think it was last class, about how technology is the only like kind of thing where you would buy something that's broken and still want to buy it and be excited about it. So like in a way, like, do you think Tesla would be as popular as it is today if they didn't release like the autopilot feature, regardless of like terminology, whether you want to like disagree that it should or shouldn't be called autopilot? I don't think Tesla would be as big as they are today without, if they had released a car that didn't have that.
I agree with you. I think they're a buzzworthy company. I mean, right now they're going to be facing competition from Ford and GM and Fiat, who are all making battery-powered autonomous vehicles. So they're going to be facing big competition. And Elon Musk is no dummy. He knows he's got to keep the buzz in his car. The very fact that the upgrade to the car a few years ago that made it go really fast was called ludicrous mode or ludicrous speed. I forget what they call it, right? A reference to Spaceballs, the movie. That says to me that he knows exactly who he's selling to. And the very fact that Elon Musk can go on a podcast, drink liquor and smoke pot on the air, and see his stock prices rise the next day, he knows who his constituents are. Yes?
And this is just like totally from personal experience, because not everybody buys for this reason. But my grandparents totally bought just for that reason, because like they're getting older and they know that like probably within the next 15 years they'll lose their license because like you get older, you just can't drive anymore. And like they want to be able to still be like self-reliant, not to rely on other people to help them. So like they said, if they could just be like one of the first people to get into this car that will actually take them, and they don't need a license, like that would be like perfect for them. So that was a total reason why they got one.
I definitely got to meet you. Yes.
What's the word of Google self-driving car?
I haven't heard much. Although the funny thing about Google is they're making cars without steering wheels and consoles. Their intent is to really pull people out of the equation. So to go to your point, Brady, that human beings are the variable that causes the problem, Google definitely agrees with that statement as well. So, guys, I really appreciate you humoring me with some conversation about what's going on in the world. I think this stuff all ties directly in because we all know why these companies are interested in self-driving cars. In addition to selling cars and getting alcoholics off the road or drunks off the road, they also want to sell us advertising. Guys, we left off in our last class talking about the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing our website development or our app development. To kind of summarize this, what happened with my screen? Oh, it's back. Elon Musk is listening to me here. He's messing with me for busting out his cars. Outsourcing, the biggest advantage is you might not have the expertise in-house. You can outsource to somebody who does. You may get a higher quality product. The disadvantage is you're going to pay for it. You're not pulling the knowledge in-house. You may ultimately have less control over it. And in terms of hosting, just to remind you what we talked about last time, one of the big advantages to getting outside your own institution for hosting is multiple internet connections, redundant power, maybe even reliability. Or you can co-locate, meaning if somebody's got a really conveniently built server room, you can put your own hardware in there and host it yourself. I think our text does a pretty good chart here in terms of saying what your options could be for building and hosting the site. You could build it in-house, you could host it in-house, or you could completely outsource and go to the other extreme. Build it, outsource, and host it, outsource. When you get to this corner, that's where you get to the big bucks, because you're literally beholden to somebody else on a contract to be able to do your updates to your site, to make your site change, to do anything that you have not already done. So you've got lots of choices. When you do the assignment that you're going to be doing when you get back, I'm asking you to answer these questions based on your own expertise. For example, if I ask you, would you build a website for Heroes for Hire yourself, or would you hire somebody else to do it? If you've never built a website before, you don't really know how or don't feel that you're that good at it, that's a reason to outsource. Or if you wanted to build the site yourself, but you felt you still wanted to pay somebody else to do the hosting, you would illustrate that, and some of your explanations would be the reasons we just talked about: cost, expertise, and reliability. Those are good examples of the ways we do this stuff. Now, guys, we're going to be getting into some stuff that's a little bit theoretical today, and we're going to be talking about how you build layers of websites and how hosting actually works, how multiple types of web servers work together. If you are not an IT person in this class, do not fear. We're still talking about theoretical levels, and you're going to understand the difference between horizontal and vertical scaling. Let me just ask you a question. We say a company is very vertically integrated. What do we mean by that? From a business standpoint, Amazon is very vertically integrated. What do we mean? Yes.
Like they kind of do the entire like chain of business. So like not only are they going to be like the suppliers, they're also actually like they're selling the stuff. They have this website. They're making like they have their Amazon Basic stuff, and they have their services. They're like like streaming services and stuff.
Exactly.
They make their own shows with that.
Excellent summary. So we're talking about pulling more services in. When we do vertical integration with a server, for example, it just means we're putting more services on the same box. Now, for Amazon, that's a positive, because they've got all kinds of services to cut out the middleman and cut out cost. Vertical scaling in a server, for example, has limitations in terms of hardware. When we go horizontal, it tends to be a better option for most servers and most IT systems. And we're going to differentiate between those two. When you're building your system, though, you have multiple ways you might test it. It's something to think about. Unit testing simply means every single component in the system we may test out. Is our router working? Is this server working independently before we add another server? Then we combine it all together, and we know that our router, our internet connection, our database, and our web server are all working together as one big system. We can test that together. Acceptance testing might mean, for example, if I hired Bryce to build a website for me, and I had these following business criteria, if he sat down with me and went through it, and we tested every aspect, I accept it. I sign off to say, yes, you've done it what I expected you to do. It's technical, but it's also a business step, because from a contractual standpoint, we're saying, I accept what you have built for me. A/B testing means you might take multiple approaches. You might decide, hey, well, we're deciding whether or not we want to put virtual operating systems or actually have physically separate boxes to build our system. When I say virtual operating systems, how many of you know what I mean? Guys, if you don't know what I mean, here's what that means. You could have a single box, for example, a single server box. You can run Windows, you can run Linux, you can run Unix, you can run multiple operating systems called virtual servers. And it's the idea, and Jill, you can tell me this is a good analogy. It's kind of like giving your computer multiple personalities. And it means you're making maximum use of your processor capabilities. The other option you could do would be to put all those operating systems and components on separate boxes. You could test which one works better. Is that a good analogy?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. And multivariate testing means we're changing one thing in the system and just seeing how it works. Well, we decided to try this with a Unix operating system and we decided to try it with an Oracle database. And we're going to go over to a typical, maybe we'll go from Unix to Apache for our web server and see how that plays with our backend and our Oracle database. By the way, has anybody here ever worked with Oracle? Great. It's a great skill to have, and it's a company that fewer and fewer people are getting into that these days, and it's a high demand field. So if you're doing Oracle, that's great. Guys, in terms of also building a website, we're thinking about things that are ultimately going to break. For example, you have scheduled maintenance on your car. You know that every so many thousand miles, usually for most people it's between 2,500 and 6,000 miles, we change the oil. The oil is probably still good, but we're doing scheduled maintenance to make sure that nothing breaks down. So the less unscheduled maintenance we need, the more we can predict what's going to break. We're doing system patches. If we're making sure that we're checking our internet connection, even literally checking our cabling, that stuff can reduce the number of breakdowns we get. Guys, think about this. It's very difficult. I know this comes right out of our text saying that, for example, a $40,000 e-commerce site may require $40,000 annually to upkeep. That may be. The bigger question is, if your site went down, what would it cost you? Think about this. Amazon doesn't generally have outages, but they've had a few. Google generally doesn't have outages, but they've had a few. What would it cost Amazon to be down for 10 seconds? Well, somebody do this. Google for me how many transactions. How many transactions does Amazon make per second? Transactions or sales. Do a search on that.
306 transactions.
Yeah, so take that times 10 seconds, and that's how many transactions they've lost. I guarantee that the cost that Amazon would spend on maintenance, if they would take that number and take it times the number of sales they make in a year, cut it in half, cut that down by another half even, and it's still worth investing that much in what we refer to as preventative maintenance. The bottom line is what your maintenance is worth is what your company would lose if your system went down. When we say benchmarking, guys, I'm going to actually be showing you a video about a company that failed to benchmark. Has anybody heard the term in a business sense before? What is benchmarking? Yes?
It's like taking the industry standards or practices or like whatever like your competition's doing and then checking them against your own.
Exactly right. And so say, for example, we started our own e-commerce company and we're subbing our hosting out to somebody else. This is a very common figure you'll hear from all internet service providers. We guarantee 99.9% uptime. Everybody in the world wants to say that. Hardly anybody actually accomplishes it. Even if you're getting into the world of ISO 9000. How many of you are familiar with that term, by the way? It's a quality standard that means that it's something like one defect per million is what they're promising. And to have that standard in the world of the internet is very tough. But that's a benchmark that other companies have set. We may also be setting benchmarks that we can handle X number of users per second. So that would be an example. So in terms of making our website work well, things that we need to think about. First is, how does the page actually get to somebody in the first place? If we're logging on to eBay or Amazon, what kinds of things are going to determine how quickly that page loads? Well, actually, we're going to be talking about some of this, but what are some of the limiting factors? What limits how quickly a web page loads on your computer? Yes?
How big images are?
We have big images we have to download. Excellent. Let's just say big images and files in general. What else would be a limitation? What else would determine how quickly a page would load? Yes? Yeah, do you have good quality internet or not? What else? Bandwidth, for sure. So we get internet speed, bandwidth all play together. Is there anything else? Yes?
The amount of people accessing that website.
Bingo. How many people are hitting that website at the same time? Anything else? Here's a secret, guys. Let's say, for example, Ryan decides, what's a website you like to go to? You can mention in class. Miniclip. Okay, so let's say, for example, what is that site for? Well, if Ryan goes to Miniclip, does anybody else in this room go to that site? Okay. Well, here's the deal. If Ryan and Brady get on that site, everybody else in the room, when they go to it, it'll load more quickly for them than it did for these two guys. Why is that? Yes? Yep, that's exactly right. It's called local caching. And for example, if we're watching videos, once one person, for example, watches a Netflix video in a dorm room, now this is theoretical, because we are talking about some of our limited architecture here sometimes, but theoretically, the next person who brings up that same exact video should load more quickly because it's been cached somewhere locally, either in this system or in this leg of the internet. All that stuff determines how quickly pages get to us. When we talk about page generation, what we're talking about is dynamically generated pages. If Riley and I both log on to Amazon, I guarantee, well, actually, even in my Batman class, so maybe our Amazon pages look pretty similar now, I don't know. But I guarantee that the contents that are going to come up in both of our pages will look different. And finally, your page content comes down to what was it written in. Was it written in really good HTML? We're using things like HTML5 that create graphics and really good quality moving videos, or is it an older HTML site? All these three things together will go and tell us if we've got an optimal website or not. Guys, will somebody in their own words describe Amazon's website to me? What does it look like? I'm sorry? It is a little cluttered. No argument about that. They're putting all kinds of content out there. Is it a fancy site, though? What color is the background? It's white. It's white. And what are the other colors on the page, Jim? Yellow? Maybe some blue? Yeah, these are very simple colors that look good on just about any screen. That's intentional because even if you are on a crappy internet connection, the basics of that page are going to come up very quickly. That's an optimized website. That doesn't mean it's really cool looking. It doesn't mean it's fun to look at, but it means it's been optimized. So some of the other things too, guys, in terms of new methodologies that are coming out, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because Jill gave a really good answer in terms of the differences between waterfall and agile. But the bottom line is more and more these days, especially when we're getting into more complicated types of e-commerce sites, for example, we're doing more of what we refer to as agile or prototype development. Some of the methodologies even get referred to by terms like Scrum. What we're talking about essentially is very quickly developing parts of sites in the same way that we develop operating systems or other technologies. And a lot of these things are being developed to work in chunks or modules we can put together. So, for example, if you see a site that you like to shop on that says we're going to be down on Friday night for maintenance, the domain still works, the page may still come up, but the shopping cart might not be working because it was developed in these kinds of methodologies where you can look at pieces and parts. What I gave you was a very oversimplification of what we're talking about, but the bottom line is that rapid is king right now, and we want to be able to develop by components. Before we get into system architecture, because this is really some of the stuff I want to get into today, I want to pause for a second to take a question or a comment. We've been moving very quickly today. If there's a question or comment, or a statement they're dying to make, or a song they want to sing. Any questions or comments, guys? Seriously, I'm following the TED Talk rule. I did 17 minutes. I have to stop for a second. The silence is uncomfortable. We're in the Western world, so we've got to fill it with something. Somebody tell me one thing they're excited about after they. Who here is this is your last class, by the way? All right. So what are you excited about for 12:50 on Friday? Yes.
Get some lunch and go watch Marvel.
Anything in particular?
I've been watching an order with John Carr, so next is Ant-Man and the Wasp.
Nice. I really like that movie. I thought Ant-Man was the most surprising Marvel movie that came out other than Guardians of the Galaxy. Ant-Man was solid. Who else? What else are you guys going to be doing at 12:50? Yes.
Probably gonna go to work and then go to my dorm and then close the dorm and then go home. So I'm excited for that.
Do you get to close the dorm Friday afternoon, or do you have to wait till Saturday morning?
No, I'm not the overnight already, so I get to leave I think around like 7 or 8 on Friday. So I live 25 minutes away, so I'll go home, eat some leftovers.
Good for you. Living the dream. Well, what I'm going to be doing on Friday night, my wife's birthday is tomorrow, so Friday night we're going out to see a concert, and I'm trying to make sure her birthday is amazing. This is what happens. This is my last story. We'll get back into more content today. The older you get, the less romantic your birthday presents get, and they become very pragmatic. My wife got a set. She doesn't know this yet. She didn't listen to my YouTube channel, so I can say it. She got a set of very high-temperature cooking gloves because she's always burning her hands when she's making these fancy recipes. So I got her a super heavy-duty set of cooking gloves, not oven mitts, but gloves that are good up to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. So she should be good to go for a while. Don't want her to mess up her hands. So guys, we start talking about system architecture. The term architecture means how is something built. And when we start talking about a system architecture, guys, what we're talking about is how the components fit together. The two most common types of architectures, in fact, the two types of architectures are referred to as two-tier and multi-tier. Now, back before we got more linear in some of these discussions, we even referred to two-tier as single-tier. And I'll explain how this fits together. The most primal website you can build is a web server and a database. I should say the most primal e-commerce server you can make. You can make a basic website without a database. You can set up a site up to be a server and just put up static web pages, but who really wants to look at that? You could share MP3 files on a basic web server, but people aren't really doing that now with the advent of streaming. So a two-tier has a web server and a database. Why are databases so important for e-commerce, guys? What is a database? First of all, yes. Exactly right. It's data that we can store in a way that's useful and retrievable. If we get into a multi-tier website, we're talking about further separation of the different components that go into making an e-commerce site. If you've ever been on a small business website where somebody built it themselves, they might be hosting the web server and the database on the same server. Or if they're buying web space from Amazon Web Services, it may be all housed on the same virtual server. The bigger you get, the more you need multiple tiers. So here's an example illustrated of a two-tier web server. Very basic. We've got the person at home who's shopping. They're logging on to our KentTonkin.com website to buy a t-shirt with my face on it. They're scared off by some of the designs, but they go through it anyway, and the content is populated by the database back through the website. They get a beautiful picture with my face on it. It's amazing. They wear it every day. Now, if they're going to a bigger website, like they have people, they're selling t-shirts with your faces on, everybody wants those. So we're going through what we refer to as a multi-tier architecture. All this means, guys, is the company has gotten bigger and we're separating the functions. So we've got one layer, a first layer, could be just for incoming requests. Our second, or our middle tier, means where are some of our applications on this. And this could be our database. This could be our shopping cart. This could be anything involving e-commerce is in the middle layer. And then we get to the back end, and it's what we refer to as corporate applications. So literally, we could be tying in systems that the public will never see behind the scenes, all part of the same infrastructure. Let me give you an example why this is important. Has anybody ever had to chat with a live person on an e-commerce site to get an answer to a question? Yeah, me too. Well, those folks, you ever notice at the end of it, they always ask you, will you complete a brief survey? Well, here's why. That person who's working for Amazon, who's helping you in their customer relationship management system within their e-commerce infrastructure, is getting evaluated back here for their performance. So these systems all tie together. I know this is not an HR class, but if we're running a large e-commerce company, don't we want to see how our performance stacks up? Yeah, I would. I want to know if I was training my operators well. If everybody were making the same amount of sales, I would be evaluating that stuff. I'd also be looking at, with all the folks who are ordering stuff, how quickly is it going out? We're looking, for example, in our finance application, how quickly are the bills getting paid? Are most people paying with gift cards? Are they paying with PayPal? Are we paying more in transaction fees with credit cards? Why do you think, for example, why does Amazon incentivize you buying Amazon gift cards? They run deals on them all the time. Yes? They got a guaranteed sale. That's number one. Why else? Yes?
Probably because they use credit cards, they miss out on that money.
Exactly. You're basically buying in their currency, so they're not paying part of that fee to Visa or MasterCharge or whoever, MasterCard rather, whoever is their credit card provider. That's how all these tiers play together. Does that make sense, guys? And again, the bigger you get, the more you can separate components, the more you can grow the system. We're going to talk about the difference between vertical and horizontal integration, but it ties into this. What we're talking about right now is a logical diagram. We're going to get into some of the physical diagrams shortly. But before we do, we're going to talk about some of the greatest crashes in history. This predates you guys by a good bit in terms of your consideration of the healthcare system. But when the Affordable Care Act came to us back in around 2012 or 2013, does anybody remember anything about its rollout? Did it work well or did it not? Tell me why.
I remember hearing about it, like, it seems to be like the big thing that came out. But, like, was it free healthcare or?
Well, it was the idea that uninsured people could shop for reasonably priced health.
And there's too many people talking on the website.
That's exactly correct. I'm going to show you a brief video about it so you can see what it was kind of like. Administration. My point is the folks who were responsible for this did either inadequate research in terms of how many users they should be expecting. They did not do adequate system testing if they did know how many users they should be expecting, or they built their system on a flawed architecture. We don't know much about the architecture because they really wouldn't say much. But
8 million people got on, and it was able to, withstand 30 million. What happened? And what happened if 30 million people actually got on?
it's a really good question. And what also happened too, when this crap started hitting the fan, the administration pulled in people from Amazon, Google, and a bunch of big tech companies to bail them out. Yes.
It's like common problem I see in these like apps that are used for government reasons, they're always outsourced, right, to other companies. I think they do a poor job of verifying that those companies are actually able to make a functioning product.
I think that's a valid point. I do, but I can also take the alternative standpoint as well, that I think sometimes, and again, this is not a political statement. I think if we take a for-profit company and we take government, for example, the funding models behind the two sometimes influence performance too. For example, if we have an issue with government types of funding, when I'm opening my mouth and hearing my parents come out, it's really freaking me out. But when you think about the way that government works, if something doesn't work and you need more money, what do? You raise taxes. If you are a private contractor, if I paid Jess Woods has a contract with me that she has to deliver this website for me, and it's for $5,000, and Jess, all of a sudden it costs you $7,500 instead of $5,000. You agree to get it to me for $5,000. What's going to happen? You're going to lose money. Yeah, because you're legally under contract. So I think sometimes too, a lot of this stuff, although these are technical issues, it comes down to how you negotiate things like contracts. How many of you anticipate working in some kind of management or technology management? Anybody think in that direction? Yeah. One of my strongest recommendations to anybody who does that stuff, take a course in contracting in terms of knowing how to make people accountable for their actions, but also to give yourself a way out when somebody is screwing you on a contract. So that's a good place for us to cut for today, guys, even though we're about 5 minutes ahead of schedule, just because we're going to be getting into some things that are more in depth. We're going to be talking more on Friday. Guys, watch the movie if you haven't already. Do your discussion posting. You can leave here with clear conscience. Have a good day, guys.